17 Strangest Final Burial Requests of Famous Celebrities, Golden Age Hollywood Stars. What's the one thing all of us will eventually face but few dare to plan for? Death. And while most people's final wishes are simple and predictable, Hollywood's Golden Age stars took their final curtain calls to shocking extremes. I've uncovered 17 burial requests so bizarre, so unexpected, you'll question everything you thought you knew about these silver screen legends. From secret love tokens to macabre keepsakes, these aren't just celebrity burials, they're final performances that will leave you speechless. And number 7, that revelation changed how historians view one of Hollywood's most misunderstood stars forever. But first, what drives someone who lived in the spotlight to make such strange final demands? Is it ego, secret guilt, or something far more personal that reveals who these icons truly were behind their carefully crafted personas? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll discover the shocking truth about what these stars wanted to take with them to eternity and why. Number 1. Marlene Dietrich, the perfect face for eternity. When Marlene Dietrich died in 1992 at age 90, she left behind a career spanning 7 decades and burial instructions as meticulous as her famous image. The German-American actress who captivated audiences in films like Morocco and The Blue Angel wasn't about to let death diminish her legendary beauty. Dietrich left elaborate instructions for her undertaker that would make any Hollywood makeup artist proud. She demanded to be dressed in a custom-designed white silk gown and insisted on specific makeup application techniques she'd perfected throughout her career. Her instructions included precise details about foundation shade, how to contour her famous cheekbones, and even the exact angle at which her head should be positioned to capture her good side. But here's what makes Dietrich's request truly extraordinary. She also arranged for a special pillow designed to create tension in her facial skin, essentially giving herself a final facelift for eternity. This wasn't vanity, it was brand management beyond the grave. What drove this level of control? Those close to Dietrich revealed she'd once said, "I've spent my life creating Marlene Dietrich. I refuse to let death undo my work." She understood something crucial about fame. Your image outlives your body. But the most poignant detail? After all this preparation, Dietrich requested a closed casket funeral. All that perfection was for her alone. One final private performance from a woman who'd spent her life being observed. Number 2, Bela Lugosi, Forever Dracula. I am Dracula. These 3 words defined and ultimately consumed Bela Lugosi, the Hungarian actor who brought the iconic vampire to life in 1931. When Lugosi died in 1956, his strange burial request revealed just how completely the role had consumed him. Lugosi insisted on being buried in his full Dracula costume, complete with the iconic black silk cape that had made him famous. This wasn't a publicity stunt arranged by studio executives. It was Lugosi's personal request, made to his son and 5th wife, Hope. What makes this request particularly heartbreaking is the context behind it. By the time of his death, Lugosi had been typecast, addicted to morphine, and nearly bankrupt. The character that made him a star had also destroyed him. His insistence on being buried as Dracula wasn't celebration, it was resignation. His son later revealed something his father told him. "I have no identity beyond this cape. If I must spend eternity somewhere, let me spend it as the one character the world will never forget." The tragedy deepened at his funeral. Despite once commanding Hollywood's attention, only 100 people attended. Among the mourners was Lugosi's friend Boris Karloff, who had found success beyond his monster roles while Lugosi remained trapped in Dracula's shadow. Today, Lugosi rests at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California. Horror fans still leave plastic bats and roses at his grave, tributes to a man who couldn't separate himself from his most famous role, even in death. But perhaps the strangest twist? The cape was actually returned to his family decades later and sold at auction for $48,000. Proof that Lugosi was right about one thing: the world never would forget Dracula. Number 3, Elizabeth Taylor, fashionably late, even in death. Elizabeth Taylor, the violet-eyed queen of Hollywood who married 8 times and collected diamonds like some people collect stamps, wasn't about to let a little thing like death prevent her from making a grand entrance. When Taylor died in 2011 at age 79, her final instructions left even her closest friends stunned. She demanded to arrive at her own funeral fashionably late, not metaphorically, literally. Her explicit instructions specified that her casket should arrive 15 minutes after the service had begun. As the mourners gathered at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, the service started precisely on time. Then, exactly 15 minutes later, the doors opened and Taylor's casket arrived, causing exactly the stir she'd intended. One attendee later remarked, "Even from the beyond, she knew how to make an entrance." But Taylor's dramatic timing wasn't her only unusual burial request. She also insisted on being buried with her favorite pair of diamond earrings, rumored to be worth more than most people's homes. And despite her larger-than-life persona, she requested an unmarked grave, a final paradox from a woman who lived her life in the spotlight. Why would someone who thrived on attention choose anonymity in death? Some believe it was to prevent her grave from becoming a tourist attraction. Others suggest it was her final act of privacy after a lifetime of scrutiny. But those who knew her best offered another explanation. It was Taylor's way of having the last word in a life where others had always tried to define her. As she once said, "I've been through it all, baby. I'm Mother Courage." Even in death, Elizabeth Taylor refused to follow anyone's script but her own. Number 4, Clark Gable, Eternal Love Beyond Marriage. Clark Gable, the King of Hollywood, starred in over 60 films and captured America's heart as Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind. But despite his towering career, Gable's most profound story wasn't captured on film, it was written in his burial request. When Gable died of a heart attack in 1960, he left explicit instructions to be buried beside his third wife, Carole Lombard, despite having married twice more after her death. This wasn't a casual preference, it was his unwavering demand for nearly 2 decades. Lombard had died tragically in 1942 when her plane crashed into Potosi Mountain while returning from a war bond tour. She was just 33. Witnesses say Gable was never the same after her death. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces at 41, flew combat missions, and reportedly volunteered for dangerous assignments, telling fellow soldiers, "I don't care what happens to me." Though he later married twice more, Gable kept a room in his house exactly as it was when Lombard was alive. Their private love letters remained in his nightstand until his death. What makes this burial request particularly poignant is what Gable said to his final wife, Kay. "I finally found peace with Carole. In the end, I want to rest beside her." Kay, showing remarkable understanding, honored his wishes. Today at the Great Mausoleum in California's most prestigious cemetery, Gable and Lombard lie side by side in the Sanctuary of Trust. His simple bronze plaque reads only his name and years of life. No mention of films or fame. Because in the end, Hollywood's king didn't want to be remembered for his crown, but for the love that defined him. Number 5, Rudolph Valentino, the mystery that never dies. Rudolph Valentino, the original Latin lover, became cinema's first true sex symbol in the 1920s, sending women into frenzies with films like The Sheik and Blood and Sand. But it's what happened after his shocking death at age 31 that has become Hollywood's most enduring mystery. When Valentino died suddenly from peritonitis in 1926, America plunged into unprecedented public mourning. An estimated 100,000 people rioted at his New York funeral, breaking windows and injuring dozens in desperate attempts to view his body. But it's what happened at his Hollywood burial that defies explanation. Valentino was interred at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in a borrowed crypt, a temporary arrangement that has now lasted nearly a century. Within days of his burial, a mysterious woman dressed entirely in black, her face concealed behind a heavy veil, began visiting his grave, leaving a single red rose. Year after year, decade after decade, the lady in black continued her solemn ritual. When the original woman died, another took her place, then another, creating a tradition that continues to this day, nearly 100 years later. But here's the truly strange part. Valentino never requested this tribute. In fact, he left few instructions for his burial at all, as his death at 31 was entirely unexpected. The Lady in Black tradition began spontaneously, evolving into one of Hollywood's most enduring legends. Cemetery workers have reported other bizarre phenomena surrounding Valentino's crypt. Unexplained cold spots, the scent of exotic cologne with no source, flowers that wilt unusually quickly, except for the single red rose from the Lady in Black, which allegedly remains fresh for days longer than botanically possible. Is Valentino's grave haunted? Are the ladies in black fulfilling some secret pact? Whatever the truth, his burial site has become more than a grave. It's a living legend that's outlived everyone who knew him in life. Number 6, Joan Crawford, The Final Act of Revenge. Joan Crawford, the hard-driving perfectionist who clawed her way from poverty to become one of Hollywood's most enduring stars, saved her most shocking performance for after her death. When Crawford died in 1977, her burial instructions were surprisingly modest. She requested cremation, no funeral service, and interment in a simple crypt at Ferncliff Cemetery in New York, far from the Hollywood spotlight. But it wasn't her burial arrangements that stunned the world. It was what she left behind in her will. Crawford explicitly excluded her 2 eldest adopted children, Christina and Christopher, stating coldly, "It is my intention to make no provision herein for my son Christopher or my daughter Christina, for reasons which are well known to them." This posthumous slap became front-page news, but the true bombshell dropped 2 years later when Christina published Mommy Dearest, portraying Crawford as an abusive, alcoholic tyrant who adopted children as publicity stunts rather than out of maternal instinct. What makes Crawford's burial decisions particularly chilling is the careful planning behind them. She didn't make this decision in anger or haste. She calculated it, knowing exactly what message it would send and how it would affect her legacy. Some defenders suggest Crawford was protecting herself from the memoir she suspected Christina was writing. Others believe it was a final act of cruelty from a woman whose own traumatic childhood left her incapable of healthy relationships. Either way, Crawford's grave in Ferncliffe's Sanctuary of Peace stands in stark contrast to the war she ignited beyond the grave. Her simple bronze plaque reads only Joan Crawford, 1908 to 1977, but her final act of disinheritance ensured the drama surrounding her name would never die. Number 7. Jean Harlow, The White Burial. Jean Harlow, Hollywood's original blonde bombshell, lived fast, died young, and left a burial request that continues to fascinate film historians today. When Harlow died suddenly in 1937, at just 26 years old, the world was stunned. The platinum blonde sex symbol who'd steamed up the screen in films like Red Dust and Dinner at 8 was gone at the height of her fame, the victim of kidney failure in an era before dialysis. As MGM executives panicked about the loss of their star, Harlow's mother made an unusual announcement. Jean had left specific instructions to be buried in a white gown, surrounded by white flowers in a white marble crypt. Given Harlow's sultry screen persona, this request for such purity in death seemed contradictory and puzzling. What few knew then, and what historians have since uncovered, is that Harlow had been struggling to shed her bombshell image. In private, she was intellectually curious, shy, and deeply traditional. Her white burial wasn't just aesthetics, it was a statement about how she wished to be remembered. The most heartbreaking aspect of Harlow's burial involves William Powell, the love of her life. Though they never married, Powell was devastated by her death and personally paid for her elaborate crypt in the Garden of Memory at California's most prestigious cemetery. He visited regularly for years, even after remarrying. Harlow's all-white burial created such a powerful image that it changed Hollywood funeral traditions for decades. Numerous stars subsequently requested Harlow white funerals, turning her personal choice into an industry standard for glamour in death. The final irony? The platinum blonde hair that made Harlow famous was achieved through painful weekly applications of ammonia, Clorox, and harsh soaps, treatments that some medical historians believe may have contributed to her kidney problems. In death, she finally achieved the natural purity that Hollywood had denied her in life. Number 8. Mary Pickford, America's Buried Secrets. Mary Pickford wasn't just a star, she was America's sweetheart, the first true female mogul in Hollywood history. As co-founder of United Artists and one of the industry's shrewdest businesswomen, Pickford revolutionized how films were made and distributed. But her burial requests revealed a woman deeply conflicted about her legacy. When Pickford died in 1979 at age 87, she had spent the final decades of her life as a virtual recluse, hidden away in Pickfair, her legendary Beverly Hills estate. Her burial instructions reflected this desire for privacy, with one strange exception. Pickford requested cremation and interment in a modest marker at the Garden of Memory. However, she included a bizarre provision. She wanted to be buried with a small, locked wooden box that no one, not even her husband Buddy Rogers, was allowed to open. For decades, speculation ran wild about the contents of this mystery box. Was it love letters from Douglas Fairbanks? Her great passion, business documents too sensitive to share, or something more personal and painful? The truth emerged only after Rogers' death in 1999, when her estate was fully settled. The box reportedly contained a single golden curl from her daughter Mary Charlotte, who had died of pneumonia in 1921 at just 3 years old. Few people knew Pickford had given birth during her first marriage to Owen Moore, a secret she had guarded fiercely throughout her life. Why keep this maternal side hidden? Film historians suggest Pickford feared it would damage her carefully constructed image as the perpetual child woman, the innocent girl with golden curls, who never fully grew up on screen. The final twist in Pickford's burial story: despite her meticulous planning, her remains were nearly lost. In 2012, it was discovered that the cemetery administration had misplaced records of exactly where her ashes were interred. Only after an extensive search was America's sweetheart finally relocated, a sad coda for a woman who had once been the most recognized face in the world. Number 9, W.C. Fields, The Last Laugh. W.C. Fields' most famous line wasn't from any of his films, but about his burial. On the whole, I'd rather be in Philadelphia. This quip about his hometown became so associated with Fields that most fans assumed it would mark his grave. The truth is far stranger. When Fields died on Christmas Day, 1946, a final joke from the comedian who hated the holiday, his burial instructions revealed the elaborate hoax he'd been playing on the public for years. Not only had Fields never intended this phrase for his epitaph, he'd actually made detailed arrangements to be buried in Philadelphia, the city he publicly claimed to despise. Fields had purchased a family plot at West Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia in 1923, had paid for perpetual care, and left explicit instructions to be buried there without fanfare or publicity. However, when he died in California, his estranged wife of 46 years, Harriet, and his mistress of 14 years, Carlotta Monte, engaged in a bitter fight over his remains. In the chaos that followed, Fields' son Claude made an executive decision to have his father buried at Forest Lawn in Glendale, creating the perfect punchline to his famous joke. The man who claimed he'd rather be in Philadelphia ended up permanently in California. The Philadelphia plot Fields had purchased remains empty to this day, marked only by a small plaque reading, "Reserved for W.C. Fields, 1880 to 19, with the death date never filled in. Cemetery officials report it's still one of their most requested sites, with visitors often leaving miniature bottles of martinis, Fields' favorite drink. But here's the strangest part of the story. Fields' unmarked grave in California contains what his son called traveling companions. A full-size checkerboard, Fields was a champion player, a deck of trick cards, a silver flask filled with whiskey, and 2 small juggling balls, reminders of his vaudeville origins. As his son later explained, Dad always hated to drink alone. Number 10, Theda Bara, The Vanishing Vamp's 25-year limbo. When Theda Bara, cinema's original vamp, died in 1955, her final burial request seemed straightforward: cremation and scattering in the Pacific Ocean. But what followed was one of Hollywood's strangest posthumous sagas. For an astonishing 25 years, Bara's ashes sat in storage, passed between family members who couldn't bring themselves to complete her final wish. Her remains literally sat on shelves, in closets, and even briefly in a bank vault, a macabre trophy of Hollywood's first sex symbol. Why this extraordinary delay? Charles Brabin, Bara's husband of 34 years, initially claimed he was waiting for the right moment. After his death in 1957, her ashes passed to her sister Lori, who admitted to reporters in 1963, "I can't let her go. Having her ashes makes me feel she's still here." The situation became increasingly bizarre when Lori began introducing guests to Theda, the ornate bronze urn she displayed prominently in her living room. Friends reported uncomfortable dinners where Lori would address questions to the urn, pausing as if waiting for responses. Hollywood columnist Hedda Hopper wrote in 1966, "Theda Bara enjoys a busier social calendar now than in her final living years. Lori drags that poor woman's remains to luncheons, gallery openings, and even premieres. It's the most ghoulish thing I've witnessed in 40 years, covering this town." It wasn't until 1979, nearly a quarter century after her death, that Bara's niece finally fulfilled her aunt's wishes, scattering her ashes off the California coast. By then, the story had taken on legendary status in Hollywood, with studio executives using "pulling a Theda" as shorthand for someone who couldn't let go of the past. The final irony? A 1937 vault fire at Fox Studios had destroyed almost all of Bara's films. As her niece later observed, Aunt Theda's career was reduced to ashes decades before her body was. Perhaps she wanted her physical remains to meet the same fate as her legacy. Number 11, Errol Flynn, The Rogue's Request. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling star who lived as wildly off-screen as on it, approached death with the same flamboyance that defined his scandalous life. When Flynn died suddenly in 1959 at just 50 years old, while attempting to sell his yacht to a young Castro supporter in Cuba no less, his burial requests shocked even those who thought they knew him well. Flynn left instructions that he be buried with 6 bottles of whiskey, not miniatures, full bottles of his favorite Johnnie Walker Red Label. When questioned about the unusual request, the funeral director reportedly balked. Flynn's close friend Raoul Walsh intervened, ensuring at least 2 bottles made it into the casket. But that wasn't Flynn's only unusual burial demand. He also requested that 13 women from his past be invited to the funeral, specifically 13 women who claimed to have borne his children. This provocative gesture, typical of Flynn's boundary-pushing nature, was quietly ignored by his widow, Patrice Wymore. What makes these requests particularly poignant is Flynn's awareness of his impending death. Doctors had warned him for years about his deteriorating health, to which he famously responded, "I intend to live the first half of my life. I don't care about the rest." Flynn was interred at one of Hollywood's most prestigious memorial parks. His simple grave marker bears the inscription he requested. "I made the mistake of doing what I enjoyed." But cemetery workers tell a strange tale. Despite strict regulations against alcohol on the grounds, visitors to Flynn's grave often leave miniature whiskey bottles as tributes. Staff remove them daily, only to find new ones appear. Perhaps the most fitting postscript to Flynn's burial came from his longtime friend David Niven, who later wrote, "Errol went out the way he lived, full of whiskey, full of compliments, and with his boots on." Flynn's grave ensured his reputation for rebellion would survive long after the man himself was gone. Number 12. Mae West, Diamond Lil, Forever. Mae West, the bawdy blonde who shimmied her way through Hollywood's strict censorship with double entendres and a knowing wink, approached death with the same unapologetic flair that made her famous. When West died in 1980 at age 87, her burial instructions revealed both her business acumen and her unforgettable sense of humor. West requested burial in a simple gown, surprising for a woman known for elaborate costumes, but with one extravagant addition, her favorite custom-made diamond ring, which she'd worn daily since 1935. The pear-shaped diamond, reportedly worth over $15,000 in 1980, about $53,000 today, was placed on her finger before burial. But here's the twist that shows West's legendary shrewdness. The ring was actually a high-quality replica. The real diamond had been quietly donated to a women's shelter in Los Angeles, with instructions that it be sold to fund programs for abused women. As West reportedly told her assistant weeks before her death, "Honey, no sense in both of us being buried." The inscription West chose for her crypt at Cypress Hill Cemetery in Brooklyn perfectly captured her essence. Mae West, 1893 to 1980. She did it the hard way. This wasn't just clever wordplay, it acknowledged her decades-long battle against censorship and sexual double standards. What few people realize is that West's burial location was itself a final joke. Despite spending most of her adult life in California and often lampooning her Brooklyn roots in her act, she chose to return to her birthplace for eternity. As she reportedly told her lawyer, "I was born in Brooklyn. Might as well give them one last chance to appreciate me." Even in death, Mae West refused to fade quietly. Cemetery staff report that her crypt regularly receives unusual tributes: feather bows, costume jewelry, and handwritten notes containing her famous quips. For a woman who once said, "When I'm good, I'm very good, but when I'm bad, I'm better," her grave has become a celebration of delicious badness. Number 13, Greta Garbo, The Final Solitude. "I want to be alone." This famous line from Grand Hotel followed Greta Garbo throughout her life and into her meticulously planned burial. When Garbo died in 1990 at age 84, she had been living as a recluse in New York City for nearly 5 decades, having abruptly retired from films in 1941 at the height of her fame. Her burial arrangements revealed just how deliberate her famous isolation had been. Garbo left extraordinarily detailed burial instructions, which she had prepared in the mid-1950s, more than 35 years before her death. She requested cremation, no funeral service, and burial in her native Sweden, far from Hollywood's spotlight. But what makes her planning truly remarkable is that she had purchased her burial plot at Skogskirkogården Woodland Cemetery in Stockholm decades earlier, ensuring her final resting place would be exactly as she desired. The most revealing aspect of Garbo's burial request was her insistence on a plain granite headstone bearing only her name, not Greta Garbo, but Greta Lovisa Gustafsson, her birth name. This final rejection of her Hollywood persona speaks volumes about her complicated relationship with fame. Cemetery workers have reported a strange phenomenon at Garbo's grave. Despite her legendary reclusiveness, her burial site has become one of the cemetery's most visited, yet visitors maintain an unusual silence when approaching her plot, often standing several feet back, as if still respecting respecting her desire for privacy. In a final ironic twist, Garbo's ashes were temporarily misplaced after the cremation, causing a brief panic among her executors. For several hours, one of the most recognized women in film history was quite literally lost. When her remains were located, her niece reportedly remarked, "Even in death, she manages to disappear when people are looking for her." Garbo once said, "I never said, 'I want to be alone.' I said, 'I want to be left alone.' There is a world of difference." Her carefully planned burial ensured that in death, at least, the world would finally respect that difference. Tallulah Bankhead, the hard-drinking, fast-talking actress famous for declaring "darling" to everyone she met, lived life with a hedonistic abandon that shocked even Hollywood. Her burial requests perfectly encapsulated the contradictions that made her so fascinating. When Bankhead died in 1968 at age 66, her final instructions left her family simultaneously amused and mortified. Bankhead requested to be buried with 3 items: a silver flask filled with bourbon, a pack of Craven A cigarettes, and her well-worn copy of the Bible. This trifecta, alcohol, tobacco, and scripture, perfectly symbolized the woman who once quipped, "I'm as pure as the driven slush." Her nephew later revealed that Tallulah had told him, "I want to be prepared for whatever awaits me, heaven, hell, or somewhere in between." What makes Bankhead's burial particularly interesting is its location. Despite her reputation as the quintessential cosmopolitan libertine, she chose to be buried in a small family plot at St. Paul's Churchyard in Maryland, near her father's birthplace. This decision shocked many who assumed she'd choose New York or Hollywood. The most touching aspect of her burial emerged only years later. Inside her Bible, tucked between the pages, cemetery workers found a photograph of her mother, who had died giving birth to Tallulah. On the back, in Bankhead's handwriting, was a simple message: "The only angel I ever knew." This sentiment offers a poignant insight into the woman behind the hard-living persona. Bankhead's motherless childhood likely contributed to her lifelong search for love and attention, a search that led her from Broadway to Hollywood to famous beds across both continents. Today, visitors to Bankhead's grave often continue her tradition of contradictions. Some leave miniature bottles of bourbon or cigarettes, while others leave flowers or prayer cards, tributes to a woman who embraced both sin and salvation with equal enthusiasm. Number 15, Wallace Reed, The Locket's Secret. Wallace Reed, the screen's most perfect lover and one of silent film's biggest stars, had a tragic fall that Hollywood tried to erase from history, but his burial request ensured his true story would never be completely forgotten. At his peak in the early 1920s, Reed was earning $4,000 weekly, equivalent to about $66,000 today, starring in racing films like The Roaring Road that showcased his all-American charm. But when Reed died in 1923 at just 31, studio executives scrambled to control the narrative. The truth they feared: Reed had become addicted to morphine, initially prescribed by studio doctors after a train accident during filming. As his dependency worsened, Paramount Pictures supplied him with drugs to keep him working through punishing production schedules. Reed's burial request cut through this corporate cover-up. He asked to be buried with a small silver locket containing a photograph of his wife, Dorothy Davenport. This wasn't just a romantic gesture. It was his final acknowledgement of her role in trying to save him. When Reed's addiction became unmanageable, it was Davenport who had tried to get him help, even establishing one of the nation's first addiction treatment centers. After his death, she produced and directed Human Wreckage, one of the first films to address drug addiction, though studio pressure forced her to frame it as an imported problem rather than acknowledge Hollywood's role. Reed's simple grave at Glendale's Grand Cemetery bears only his name and dates, 1891 to 1923. No mention of his stardom, his 214 films, or his tragic end. But the locket buried with him tells the real story, one of Hollywood's first casualties to an industry that still struggles with addiction and exploitation a century later. Cemetery workers report that unlike graves of other silent film stars, Reed's continues to receive regular visitors, often recovering addicts who leave sobriety chips as tributes. His legacy isn't the films that have largely been forgotten, but the warning his life and death provided to generations of stars who followed. Number 16, Pola Negri, the eternal rival. Pola Negri, the exotic Polish actress who became one of silent cinema's greatest vamps, lived for drama, on screen and off. Her burial request sparked one of Hollywood's most enduring controversies and revealed the power of jealousy to transcend even death. When Negri died in 1987 at age 97, she left instructions that shocked film historians and reignited a 60-year-old scandal. Negri requested to be buried with a small silver vial that she claimed contained the ashes of Rudolph Valentino, her former lover, and Hollywood's first male sex symbol. This request reopened old wounds. When Valentino died suddenly in 1926, Negri had thrown herself dramatically across his coffin at the funeral, claiming they had been secretly engaged. This display outraged Valentino's family and other women in his life, who insisted no such engagement existed. The truth about the vial remains disputed. Valentino was not officially cremated, and no record exists of his ashes being distributed. Yet Negri maintained until her death that she possessed this macabre keepsake, allegedly given to her by Valentino's brother. What makes this burial request particularly fascinating is what it reveals about Negri's psychology. By the time of her death, she had outlived virtually everyone from Hollywood's silent era. This final dramatic gesture ensured her name would remain forever linked with Valentino's, exactly as she had worked to establish since the 1920s. Negri was interred at Calvary Cemetery in Los Angeles, her grave marker bearing the inscription she requested. Here lies the last of the great tragedians. Whether the vial actually contained Valentino's ashes is unknowable, but the gesture itself guaranteed that the great rivalry between Negri and Valentino's other lovers would continue into eternity. As film historian Kevin Brownlow later noted, "In death as in life, Pola Negri understood that in Hollywood, perception is reality. The truth was always secondary to the legend." Number 17, Marilyn Monroe, the promise Joe DiMaggio kept. Marilyn Monroe, the blonde bombshell whose tragic death at 36 transformed her from movie star to eternal icon, left few specific burial instructions. But what happened after her death in 1962 reveals one of Hollywood's most enduring love stories, and a promise kept for decades. When Monroe died from a barbiturate overdose, her estate was in disarray. It fell to her ex-husband, baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, to arrange her funeral and burial. Though they had been divorced for 8 years and had been married less than a year, DiMaggio took complete control, barring many Hollywood figures from attending the service. DiMaggio chose a small crypt at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles and made an extraordinary promise. He arranged for roses to be delivered to Monroe's crypt 3 times weekly for the next 20 years. What makes this story remarkable is that DiMaggio, known for his frugality, never publicized this gesture. It was discovered only when cemetery workers noticed the same florist making regular deliveries. For 2 decades, through changing seasons and fading memories, the roses arrived without fail, a silent tribute from a man who rarely spoke about their relationship. Only after DiMaggio's death in 1999 did his attorney reveal the ball player's words from decades earlier. "I'll never forgive myself for not being able to save her." The roses weren't just tokens of affection, they were acts of atonement. The most poignant detail emerged in DiMaggio's own burial arrangements. Though he remarried briefly after Monroe, DiMaggio's final words were reportedly, "I'll finally get to see Marilyn again." He chose to be buried in his family plot in California, but left instructions for a small photo of Monroe to be placed in his coffin. Monroe's crypt has become one of the most visited graves in America, with fans leaving everything from lipstick kisses to handwritten poems. But perhaps the most touching tributes are the single roses occasionally left by visitors who remember the decades when DiMaggio's flowers arrived like clockwork, proof that sometimes love outlives even the grave. These 17 burial stories reveal something profound about fame, mortality, and the human desire to control how we're remembered. Whether through dramatic gestures like Elizabeth Taylor's fashionably late arrival, poignant tributes like Clark Gable's reunion with Carole Lombard, or the ongoing mysteries surrounding graves like Rudolph Valentino's, these final requests offer glimpses into the true personalities behind the silver screen personas. As we've seen, sometimes the most telling act in a celebrity's life is how they choose to face death. These weren't just burial arrangements, they were final performances, last chances to shape legacies that continue to fascinate us decades later. What strange burial request would you make if you were famous? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey through Hollywood's most unusual final resting places, please hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell to catch our next exploration of Golden Age Hollywood's hidden stories. Until next time, remember, even in death, the stars of Hollywood's golden age knew how to steal the scene.